Welcome to another Apollo Papyrus podcast episode. I am Aaron Apollo Camp. For this episode, my interview guest is the author of the Wanderer series of fantasy novels, which blend fantasy with themes of politics, religion, and societal influences. His name is J.D. Rasch, and my interview with J.D. will follow the note-taking sounds. J.D. Rasch, welcome to the Apollo Papyrus podcast.
Happy to be here.
Feel free to introduce yourself to our listeners.
Sure. Again, it's J.D. Rasch. The first name is actually Jody, and have sort of an interesting career to get to where I am right now. Started out my career actually in international finance and did that for many years. I'm also an artist, a painter, and now a writer. I've written 3 books in what I call the Wanderer series. And I'm trying to, through the use of fiction and narrative, trying to tell people a story.
The first 2 books in your Wanderer series of fantasy novels, I'll start with them first, and they're the 2 Silver Forest books, Silver Forest Book 1, Silver Forest Book 2. Without spoiling too much about each of the Silver Forest books, what are each of them about?
They're about self-awareness, and it's about the main character's journey to look at outside influences and really get to know himself. And by doing that, he's looking for his own enlightenment.
The Wanderer series as a whole blends fantasy with themes of politics, religion, and societal influences. How do you strike a balance between telling an engaging story and exploring hot button and controversial topics like politics and religion?
Well, that's why I think it's good to do this in a fantasy novel, because you don't have to get into actual politicians or religion. So it's more, when I wrote this, it was more like a thought experiment, is that we all know, or we feel we know, what being a good person is about. But then we're faced with all different types of situations in our lives, and we have to react to that. So what I do is I put my characters in different situations, and each of them, with all good intentions, will react differently. And through that technique, we can examine how we feel and how we would react to different types of political or religious or social pressures that are being put on us all the time.
The latest book in the Wanderer series is called the Quasi-Crystal. Without spoiling too much about the Quasi-Crystal, what is that book about?
Yeah, it's about two different things. It starts out as a continuation of the first 2 books, sort of the aftermath, and again, not giving away any of the plot lines, but the aftermath of the first 2 books. What happens, with that? I'm trying to figure out a way to say this without giving up too much of it. But then it goes into another group, and the kind of the name, the Quasi-Crystal, is really a physics term, where it's about a crystal where the crystal structure is not what we normally consider a crystal. So it's really 2 different things at the same time. And the idea of the Quasi-Crystal is how we can live in 2 different realms at the same time, how we can look at what something is and look at the nature of reality. So the science themes are actually fairly big in the Quasi-Crystal, just in terms of naming of the characters and some of the situations. So it tries to get into what is the nature of the reality that we observe.
In the Quasi-Crystal, you delve deeper into individuality versus collective good than you did in the Silver Forest books. What drew you to the individuality versus collective theme, and how does it resonate with today's societal challenges?
Yeah, I think the books, particularly the first three books, kind of build on each other, and it's about taking responsibility for our own actions. So we have a societal responsibility. There are groups that act as there are people that act within a group and accept the group as norms. But the idea and the trajectory of the Wanderer series is to look at what our own personal responsibilities are, how we take responsibility for our own actions, and what does that mean, and how do we do that? And it's key is it's not the same for everyone. So I had to get more individual to show what the individual truths are for different people.
Are the characters in
Okay.
the Wanderer series entirely fictitious, or have you borrowed from real world people that you either know personally or know about in developing the characters?
Yeah, so I mean, they're primarily fictional, but obviously the types of situations that we need to react to there are based on my own experiences and experiences with in the world. So that there's certainly people that I had in mind when I wrote the book. One just in the first book, one of the characters uh, is kind of always late for things, and that concept came from one of my brothers who always shows up late for things. But other than little things like that, like little personality quirks that people might have, the characters are basically fictional.
How long did it take you to write each of the books in the series?
Well, the heavy lift were the first two books, which originally was actually one book. So that was all written. Books one and two were written at the same time, and that was where I had an idea for a book, and I would start writing it. But I'd be writing it, and then I go for a long period of time where I would put it down. So I started that book probably in the 1980s or so, and it was an interesting journey for me because whereas I had done a lot of writing for business, I hadn't really done much fiction writing. And so it took it was a eye-opening experience, the difference between business writing and trying to write a novel. In business writing, you want everything to be very concise. But when you write a novel, you need to be more expansive. People want to know what the characters look like, what's the weather like, things like that, which I had to get used to doing that. And what really helped me was having some very good editors who liked the concept of the books and what I was doing, and really gave me a master's course in writing. And so it took a bit longer to do the first two books. I would say the third book, because I think I learned my lessons pretty well. The third book probably was about a year to write from when I started it.
What are the easiest and hardest aspects of writing a fantasy novel series for you?
The hardest, we'll start with that, is making sure everything is consistent because you have no rules about how things should be or shouldn't be. So, for example, this all takes place somewhere not here. And I leave that deliberately vague. But then you have to name things. So if you have like animals, you use names that we know of in this world, but why would they be called that in some other world? And things like distances. We're very used to saying, well, that was 3 miles away, but why would they be using miles? So you have to invent or figure out a way to describe all these very casual things, which are going to a reader, I think, be very jarring if you start switching back on terminology. So that's difficult to do. You have to be very vigilant about that. I think for me, the easiest, or I wouldn't say easiest, but the most fun thing to do was to explore the personalities of the different characters. because you have free reign to, kind of make them any way you want. And so playing with that and having them react in certain ways and have certain personality quirks and all that, that was probably the most fun part of writing it.
Are all three of the books in the Wanderer series independently, traditionally, or hybrid published, or did you use different publishing methods for each of the books in the series?
No, they've all been self-published. So yeah, they're all self-published. And I'd love to get a more traditional publisher, but that's particularly for fantasy books these days, that's very difficult to do. So, I've been doing the self-publishing route, and then adding on to that, I have people who help me with the marketing side of it as well. So that's also been an interesting experience for me.
Will the Quasi-Crystal be the final book in the Wanderer series, or will there be one or more books to follow in the series? And in either case, do you plan on, or are you considering writing books outside of the series?
So to answer the first question, there's already a fourth book that's with my editor that should be coming out hopefully this year. I have ideas for three other books in this series, so we'll see what happens with them. Yeah, there's outside of the series, there's a number of different ideas that I have. In terms of writing the books, I need to know two things about the book: how it starts and how it ends, and then filling in the rest of it is sort of, well, we'll call it the easy part. So the one book that I have, I know what I want it to be about. It's more of a science fiction theme of it. I know the beginning part of it. I'm still not comfortable with the ending. So if I can figure that out, then that will be the first book outside of the Wanderer series that I'll do.
I have two questions to finish this interview, and my first of them is about how your career in the finance industry might have influenced your writing. How did your career in the finance industry, particularly your work with microfinance initiatives, shape your worldview and influence your writing?
Yeah, probably in a lot of different ways. Working in finance is very much about profit and, thinking about shareholder value and things like that. And that always bothered me, that, I think finance is extremely important. It's, the way our society actually works, yet it also leaves many people out. And so even when I was working in finance, at first corporate finance, but then at the company I was working for, I started a group called the Social Performance Group, where we looked at other things that were important other than finance, other social aspects of it. And one of the things we looked at was microfinance. And, that was, for me, I think, very important to be able to use finance in a way that helps people who are less privileged. For people who don't know, microfinance is about financial institutions effectively giving loans to people who we'll call the working poor. A lot of times it's people earning less than $1 a day on average. And you get to know, what their lives are like and how the money can help them. Also trying to prevent how people can abuse the privilege with that. And that's kind of what we did. We tried to be a little bit of an oversight on the microfinance side. And so when I wrote the book, those type of issues were forefront in my mind. Now, obviously, they're very different in terms of finance versus my fictional world. But the underlying themes about our responsibility to others and how we can enact that and how we can work together and protect each other, that I got in my finance, and that's the same things that I'm trying to put into the novels that I write.
In addition to your work as an author, you're also a painter whose art explores life's mysteries. How does your visual art inform your writing and vice versa?
Yeah, even though they sort of are nothing alike, in my mind, they're very similar. So my art explores, we'll call them metaphors of science. So the imagery comes from science, physics, astronomy, biology, among others, and it's trying to look at, these are the tools that we have, or the images that we have, that tell us what the world is really like. So, for example, if you look at physics, we look at fundamental particles of physics, which is what we're all made of, and some of the concepts in physics about when you observe, how you observe something creates its reality, or called wave particle duality. And to me, that was a fascinating concept, that how we look at something changes what it is, or changes its fundamental nature. And that theme about understanding how we fit in to the world is also in my writing, where I'm trying to explore our fundamental ideas, our fundamental notions. And in the third book, the Quasi-Crystal, probably more of those themes come out. In the first two books, it's more of the social themes. In the third book, it was more of, not really science. It's not heavy into science, but science has influenced the writing in the third book.
JD, thank you for appearing on the Apollo Papyrus podcast. You were an amazing guest to interview.
Well, thank you for having me.
I hope to be able to read JD's book soon, and I wish him well with the upcoming fourth book in the Wanderer series. This is Aaron Apollo Camp reminding y'all to find your writing and reading purpose. Bye for now. Copyright 2025, Aaron Apollo Camp, all rights reserved. This podcast episode is intended for the private listening of our audience. Any reuse or retransmission of this podcast episode without the express written consent of the podcast host is prohibited except under fair use guidelines. Royalty-free music and sound effects obtained from https://www.zapsplat.com.